Welcome to Conversations. Today we are going to speak about China and Chinese exports around the world. The Cold War that is worsening we saw after the G7 summit between China and other countries, and in fact the warning to China by the G7 to stop meddling in the Russia-Ukraine war by means of giving dual tech transfers, something that Beijing has always denied. The G7 has waived threat of further sanctions against Chinese entities, which is seen as weakening the efforts of West in containing Moscow. This must be music to the ears of India as it tries to corner the Chinese in its military and commercial activities. Since the swearing on the Modi government 3.0, the Chinese have been circumspect about the moves of the Modi government. The frequent skirmishes with the Chinese army that we saw in the past in Ladakh, Doklam and Arunachal Pradesh has led to a hardening of stance of the Modi government then with Beijing. Despite BRICS and other deals, Modi government has decided that it was time to keep the Chinese away from the Indian market. That began in a very small way with the Indian government banning Chinese imports, starting with low-hanging fruits like small electronic items, lights, toys and small stuff. Then they went into the telecom hardware, the big thing. The ban on several Chinese apps, including Hello and TikTok, were another move by the Indian government to strangulate the Chinese companies. Indian authorities also then stopped telcos in India from working with Chinese companies in the 5G trials. Huawei and ZTE are also barred from selling their products which are used in the 5G networks. More recently, several Chinese device vendors, including Xiaomi, Vivo and Oppo, have been accused of tax evasion, and I've seen raids on the companies. The companies that are dependent on Chinese imports, however, say that the government should stop harassing the Chinese companies who are doing business in India legitimately. But the Modi government will not stop investigating the Chinese transgressions at this point in time. The market share of Chinese vendors continues to fall in our country, while Finland's Nokia we saw is reportedly swapping Huawei's equipment in many networks. The Government of India mandate will limit operators and suppliers to have obtained trusted source approval from Indian authorities, including the Department of Telecom. But despite the Make in India initiative, India is still dependent on Chinese companies to a very large extent. When the Government of India shut its doors to China, the US a few years ago was India's largest trade partner. But the Chinese have clawed their way back, and India's bilateral trade with China in FY24 stood at around $118.4 billion. Imports from China increased by 3.24% to $4,117 billion, and exports rose by 8.7% to $16.67 billion in FY24 compared to FY23. China's share in India's industrial goods jumped to 31% from 21% in the last 5 years. Essential imports to factories that are manufacturing and finding an alternative source is proving to be a big challenge. And the dependence on China will continue for some time. While Indian authorities are banning China in sectors like technology and import of smartphones and telecom parts, personal computers and laptops, pharma products, especially APIs, machinery, chemicals, metals, iron and steel. 100 billion or 98% of what we exported from China were these major industrial products. Many Indian companies that depend on Chinese products want a flexible trading policy. They want more visas for the Chinese workers because the losses are mounting due to production constraints. Now the Government of India may be rethinking about the visas for the skilled Chinese workers and may benefit Chinese technicians. But that is easier said than done, as India's security concerns will have to be matched with the needs of India's manufacturing sector. India's electronic manufacturers have prepared a report which is set to estimate a loss of around $15 billion in production and about 1 lakh job cuts due to the delays of Chinese nationals coming to India. This has hindered expansion plans of many Indian companies, and a $10 billion export opportunity loss is said to be there and $2 billion in value addition loss. But the government is not willing to bend, as they see this as an arm twisting tack by the industry. The government of India's argument is that when the mobile phone companies manufacturing in India could source the material locally, what stops Indian companies, particularly the electronics and manufacturing companies, from doing so? In fact, it is not just India that has problems with China. The Chinese dumping, that is called, often around the world. Their products are dumped below the cost of production in many countries. United States is having a long-running battle with China over the manufacture of cars. President Trump, even during the recent campaign, ongoing election campaign, has been a sparring match with President Biden on banning the Chinese automotive exports into the United States. It's true that the Chinese factor has accelerated a long-running trend of decreasing manufacturing jobs in the United States. That is a sad fact, but can't be helped. In the 1950s, 30% of the US workforce was in manufacturing, and by early 2000, before China joined the World Trade Organization, it was 15% of what is normal. And that is the workforce that was into technology, automation, and digitization further reduced that. Manufacturing employment, due to the Chinese jumping in, especially, has accelerated since 2010s. Today, just 9% of the US workforce is in the manufacturing sector. Faster loss of jobs after China joined the WTO in 2001, and by about 2010, 5 million jobs were lost in the United States, especially in the manufacturing sector. What would have taken 20 years normally was accelerated by China and just took place in 10 years. The latest assault by China is the manufacturing of electric vehicles, which is being dumped in Europe and the United States like crazy. Lithium batteries and solar panels are the other two Chinese products which are seeing a huge surge into Europe and the US. Steel has been another sector where the Chinese have been pushing its exports to countries around the world, including India. On the 9th of April 2024, steel workers in Chile protested outside the presidential palace to demand higher tariff for Chinese steel imports. According to data from the Latin American Steel Association, in 2023, the region imported a record 10 million tons of Chinese steel, a rise of 44% from the year before. The reason for that is obvious, as Chinese steel is 40% cheaper than the steel made in Chile. In 2024, Chile's biggest steel company announced that it is shutting down. Top global exporters of steel as per the 2022 World Bank report are China, EU, and Austria. On the other hand, Chile, South Africa, Mexico, and even Saudi Arabia have acted against the Chinese steel exports. What is India doing? Well, I will pause here for this episode. We will have more of this Chinese threat in the coming episodes, and we will tell you what's happening. Thank you for watching. Jai Hind.